guests. It's very much an honor for me to be moderating this talk. Each one of you have been expressing the will to start with an introduction that would be maybe more relevant than a short biography, a two-liner biography that you can find online. So maybe we could start with Dany.
Yeah, hi. I met Keith in, I believe it was 1978 or 79, at Club 57. We were friends from the beginning of his time in New York, and we did a lot of fun things together, and I was also DJ at Club 57.
Have you been also DJing at Mud Club?
I DJed in a lot of other places since then.
Yes.
That was where I started though.
Yes, that's right.
My name is Gil Vasquez. I met Keith in 1988. I worked at a t-shirt store on Broadway, very near his studio, and he walks in and, you know, he was a friend of a friend, and we became very fast friends. Keith took me to every cool party in New York City. So it was like church. The clubs were like church, the DJs were like the preachers, and I got to see every, you know, amazing DJ in New York City along with Keith. So that was pretty amazing. It was a pretty amazing time.
Thank you.
My name is Leonard Abrams. I used to publish this magazine called the East Village Eye, and actually I did not know Keith personally. However, before I knew who he was, I grabbed a piece of his work, pulled it off of a lamppost. It said, Reagan slain by hero cop. And I thought, yeah, fuck Reagan. I took it home and still have it. And then, you know, he began emerging as an artist, we did a story on him and included him in several stories. And I think his influence is profound and will continue to be so. Keith's ability to seamlessly go from disposable art to eternal art, to tell stories, tell the story of the human race. Actually, even if an alien, when the aliens come and we're all dead and they see his work, I'll be happy if they do. I'll feel that the human race was somehow accounted for.
If they're going to see one artist's work, it might be him, actually. There's a fat chance, fatter than most artists, I believe. I wanted to start actually placing, let's say, giving an idea what the atmosphere might have been in the late 80s in New York, which was reputedly on the brink to collapsing financially and so on. You hear a lot about how dirty it was, how dangerous, how rough. It might have been, or it was. It seems like it depends to whom, actually, and each people I asked about, or I saw an interview about, or I've been reading about in the past weeks, say something different. So I'm quite interested what each of you thinks about that, and how did you go through it? Let's say the general vibe, the atmosphere, and the let's say the unfriendliness of it, what the reputation it had, at the same time being a super vibrant scene. So maybe someone has something to say about that thing.
Sure. So if you're talking about the late 70s, early 80s, what it was like in the East Village, I mean, there were a lot of abandoned buildings. There were a lot of you know, just bombed out looking places, and you know, I guess there were a lot of muggers and kind of junkies hanging around and stuff, but it was really not that scary. It was not that scary. I mean, sometimes you look down the street and be like, I'm not gonna walk down that street, I'll go around another one. Yeah. So, I mean, you know,
I heard
there was also the possibility, I mean, because you got all these, you know, all these places where you could just do something. And really, it's like nobody cared.
But
that you could
I
get
heard,
away with
I wanted to
things.
say, I heard a lot of people kind of minimizing or saying, well, I went through it and was okay. And on the other hand, I heard an Anne Magnuson interview, and she was really saying, I wouldn't let any of my kids go there if it was still like the same right now. People were being robbed and being killed and being raped and all. So I was thinking, everybody has a different point of view. And
Anne said that?
Yeah.
She left on Avenue. It was fine. Yeah.
But she was probably doing fine with it, but it's of course a different thing to let your kids go
She
there.
don't have any kids.
That's why.
I think you have to realize though that we had all, in New York City, we had a good 10 years of this already. Everybody was talking about my relatives who lived in the city, in Brooklyn, and in the Bronx. Even for 10 years or more, people were talking about the dangerous conditions. And so, you know, relative to the rest of the city, it wasn't shocking to us, and besides the freedom that we had to do pretty much whatever we wanted, it was worth it to us. Maybe if we weren't in our early 20s and feeling invincible, it would be different. But we took the deal for sure.
I was wondering if it's that maybe such a context that has, well, let's say, that's not economically stable and where there's a lot of uncertainty can also be sometimes a good context for genuine subcultures to incubate. And I don't have the feeling when you take a look at art history or music history and so on, you have many great things originating in a super safe place where nothing happens. So.
Yeah, I think, you know, that time, the 80s, I could probably speak to it a little bit later, but, you know, so much was going on at the same time. You know, Reagan was president. It was a Cold War.
That's 1981.
This was, you know, the HIV/AIDS crisis was just starting to emerge. Crack was starting to be a huge problem. So it was just like all of these forces that, you know, you kind of just had to live with on a day-to-day basis. So I think that really was the context, you know, and not to mention the city being what it was, you know, very gritty. The city was broke. You know, the subways were covered with graffiti. So that was the sort of backdrop that maybe allowed for just this creativity. You know, it's like you said, you know, sort of what may be considered to be bad times. Usually pretty great art comes from that. And not just art, but music as well.
Yeah. Taking a look at the East Village Eye that Leonard ran over the years from 79 to 87, more or less, you have the feeling that it's itself, the object itself, is an extremely free and kind of crazy magazine. It's done very freely, like pretty much a Dadaistic collage. At some point, you really have this feeling when you go through it. So I think it's pretty much it's a very good representation. It gives a very good idea what it might have been, the energy when you take a look. For instance, I came across, I'm a big Suicide fan. It's an extremely interesting band from those days, from the no wave movement. We don't talk about it. And I saw an interview of Alan Vega, the frontman, and it was an interview run through throwing tarot cards and picking cards and talking about them. And then it triggered a lot of interesting topics. That's not something that you see in a newspaper today, I think.
Well, first of all, we didn't pay any of the writers. So I had to let them do pretty much whatever they wanted to do. Because sometimes I'd say, no, I don't want that. And they'd be really insulted. They say, I'm writing for you for free. I said, well, yeah, I'm not charging you either. But the writers had tremendous freedom, and I just try to pick writers and editors who I thought really had something to say, and there were a lot of people who wanted to write. And, just like there were a lot of artists and performers, there were writers and photographers and artists that wanted this vehicle to express themselves. And we were all very aware of where we were. We were downtown New York. We could use this as a window to reach the world, in a sense. And a lot of these writers and artists went on to work for all kinds of larger publications. Stephen Croninger's collagist that did collages for the East Village Eye, and he went on to do work for the Times and everywhere all over the world. And then we had cartoons, we had comics, and Linda Barrett, who became very well known all over the world. So that was how we got all these people to give us this material, because we worked really hard to present it well, and we were able to reach the rest of the world this way. Not like today, where you could reach the world in 5 seconds, but maybe over the course of 5 months or a year, you could get the word out on something.
It was very much a catalyst for everybody in East Village, no? This magazine.
Yeah.
It seems like it, because you have a lot of rubrics, you have a lot of things that are practical tips about the area. Other things are more about, hey, we're going to give you something to reflect on, to think about for a while. Or how is this artist doing right now? That is from the hood, stuff like that. So the feeling was very much in the life.
I really don't know. I don't know how to compare it to today. Today is so different. But I can tell you that the fact that we were able to codify, put together this portrait of what's going on in a medium that would last for a long time was very powerful.
For $1 too. For New Yorkers was $1, right? The price of it.
Yeah, it started out at 50 cents, it was $1, it was $1.50. Yeah, it wasn't a lot of money. The first one said 50 cents, $1 outside Manhattan. So we were very chauvinistic about Manhattan, really. But I think it ultimately it magnified what was going on, and people needed that. They needed the validation not only maybe for the state of mind, but they needed to be written about. They needed to be seen as artists to get the work out, and I think that it did help a lot of people do that.
It seems to me, and that's really, I really ask my questions for everybody, and please interrupt each other so it's not too square. It would be much better if it's possible to do it that way. It seemed that there was a certain lack of boundaries between artistic disciplines. I saw even a few statements. You have a book called New York Noise. I don't know who's ever. It's a big book, a big color book that was put out by Soul Jazz Records. They also published the World of Keith Haring, and it's all about the music you listened. And basically, you have a lot of statements by artists from those days, and they basically will say the same thing. There was no boundaries between artistic disciplines, and I think that characterizes it.
Yeah, that is very true. I mean, people would do all different things. Keith would do performance. He did spoken word poetry. He did Xerox art. He did stencil art. Well, one thing, Clones Go Home. That was when the Saint was opening in the East Village, and we at Club 57, had like a little meeting. No, not a meeting. We were all drunk, and we were like, what if we go over to where the Saint is opening, and we pretend to be Christians, and we're gonna, bang a drum and go, oh, sinners, because this gay club is opening. Of course, it was all gay guys saying they're gonna do this. And of course, it never happened. but Keith did go around and spray "Clones Go Home" around the East Village, which was hilarious. And it was signed FAFH, which means Fags Against Facial Hair.
Can you tell us a bit about the performance he did with the outside of the television frame? It seems like it was a
we
thing
did
for
this
you.
night, and it was curated. I mean, it was thrown together by John Sex. John Sex, who was a really great graphic artist, and did beautiful silkscreen posters, especially for Irving Plaza. They hired him to do those. And also for the club, he did those for us. And he printed them at SVA, School of Visual Arts. He had the use of their silk screening place. And so he put this together, and each of us come up with some ridiculous thing to do. He stuck his head in the TV. I don't remember what he did.
It seems like it was always somewhere between freaking out together and doing art, and sometimes even serious art, so to speak, but nothing was done seriously, it seems.
That is true. I mean, he's more serious and more hardworking than everyone else.
Yeah.
But when it comes to like let's all do mushrooms and get ridiculous, he was down with that too.
Yeah, I think it was Kenny Sharp depicting it as some kind of permanent orgy. I heard that.
Kenny Sharp is like the world's biggest pothead, and he is just so much fun.
That's the way
he is the biggest nut in the world. He wouldn't mind me saying this.
I think
He's
you would
great.
like that, I guess. You see it, you take a look at his works, and you can see it's very much about psychedelia and
Oh yeah, I mean,
visions.
he did a lot of stuff. He painted right on the walls of Club 57. If you could like scrape away some of the stuff, you'd find a lot of great things under there.
Okay. Was it the general vibe, or is it specific to Club 57 to be so much like pretty much a youth club that's turned dadaistic and crazy and creative?
I can't say that we were the only one. There were a lot of places where a lot of great things happened.
But it was an early one, right?
Yeah, I mean, early 80s. It didn't last very long.
Yeah.
I think my view of Club 57 was that it had a specific energy that very few places had. First of all, there was no meanness. I mean, you didn't see an angry energy, put down energy. It was very fun-loving, and it was very experimental. This is madcap, kind of a madcap quality, where anything could happen. And there were not too many, I can't see it, I don't know if there's anything else that really compared to that Club 57 energy. There were other groups that were important groups. There was collaborative projects. People, I think they took themselves a little more seriously. But I mean, at the same time, people took the art at Club 57 very seriously, obviously. People very extensive careers came out of Club 57. But that playful energy, it was something very, I think, kind of unique to Club 57 that I saw.
Something that I find really relevant in the information available about it is that it seems to be very much as performance was a way of life, and living was like some kind of constant performance. It's not seen as a separated, clearly bound, like clearly separated thing from one another. It seems more like it was a constant feedback between both things, and the freaking out was part of creativity and all. I think it's strongly missing in, for instance, any institution at all, and it's something you can only have in a non-institutional place that becomes an institution after because of its fame or what it was. But I mean, you really have this feeling. You see Klaus Nomi performances, you see John Sachs, you see Anne Magnusson, you see all these things, and you have a feeling, okay, it was basically a performance all the time. It's not just about you're on stage. Was there a stage? I have no idea.
It was smaller than this.
Okay, you're on the stage and you
Yeah.
perform and you're important, and then you're back to being someone part of the audience, or everybody
Yeah,
was
it was-
audience and artist, no?
To come up and do something and go back in the audience. We didn't have to have the public. I mean, they did come sometimes, but some of these nights that people talk about had, maybe 10 people in them.
I think it also speaks to the importance of having the freedom to do all these things. That I don't know how, I can't say how it is over here, but I can tell you in New York and probably most places in the United States, people in the arts are very constrained. People are encouraged to go on a track and do one thing and keep hammering away at it, and there isn't the same experimentation. And you're not going to stop in the middle of your art career and start a rock band just for fun. That's not even maybe very good, but you just do it anyway, or DJ, or do completely, or do work that's self-destructive. What is to say that's disposable. No. Now you have to create a commodity. You have to be a commodity. It's hard. I don't see how the work can be as interesting if you have those constraints.
I found a quote by Sal Principato from the band Liquid. We will listen a bit of music too today. And I really liked it. I really liked the quote because it seemed interesting and meaningful in this context. But basically was saying that in so many ways there was a seamless between the various artistic disciplines, but in my estimation it was music that was the ascendancy. Yeah, seamless lack of boundaries, that's what I skipped. Whether you were a painter, dancer or filmmaker, everybody seemed to want to be in a band. Why the convergence? I think there was an atmosphere akin to a cultural Wild West or East, depending on your location. Nobody wanted to be pigeonholed, nobody wanted to be restricted. So is that so for everybody, like the appeal of music, pretty much? Very much about music?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, there were so many places to see bands, and I really loved that no wave thing because it was really like, let's just get up there and do something. I was in a band too. She was in it. We couldn't play. I mean, we were like a joke, but we started playing. We were playing in all the clubs after a while. Yes. And
what I find interesting of some of that music from the time is that a lot of it doesn't really belong to any genre. Like the liquid stuff, like the songs like Cavern, those songs were like adopted by hip hop, but they're not necessarily hip hop songs. ESG, songs like Moody, UFO, you can't put those in any box. It's not R&B, it's not rap, it's not hip hop, it's not rock. It's its own thing.
Even the rock sounding ones are not really rock, like DNA or bands like that.
Yeah, I mean, there were songs, like that go back to the 70s, like, Babe Ruth, the Mexican. That was like a song, it was like a rock song that was adopted by hip hop.
We could maybe listen to the first song that's maybe the most emblematic song of the no wave movement, which seemed to be the most, let's say, typically New York musical movement that happened back then. It's Contort Yourself by James Chance. Maybe you'll have things to say about it later on, if it works. Play it louder.
Control.
We don't have a lot of time, so it's always difficult to interrupt the song, but we'll have many more of them. But let's say it's everything and nothing at the same time, pretty much.
Yeah.
It's punk,
But let's
it's
just say
jazz,
this,
it's not.
we're laughing because it's old, and I used to go see them, and it is a lot of fun. I mean, I didn't play any of it last night. It's it doesn't belong on any dance floor. It doesn't belong, and it's not rock, and it's not, it's a little, it's like James Brown on crack or something. And I love it.
I think it's really a great song. It really captures the energy, and I can hardly think of the handful of songs he did in that period. I can hardly think of a more emblematic sound. And one lyric that I don't know who's on this song, but he goes, "Why don't you try being stupid instead of smart?" And I think that was brilliant, because what he's saying is you lose your self-consciousness, and people did that, and they had the freedom to be stupid, and that's when some of the best shit happened.
It seemed to me that the musicians in the no wave movement and pretty much the New York scene of the late 70s, early 80s were not into, maybe Lydia Lunch was, and some of them, but most were not into contesting as a way, like super clearly making political statements, but doing something completely off and completely different from what was existing as a mean of subversion, rather than being subversive textually and literally. Like
something, I think that we all kind of had this idea that when Ronald Reagan became president, it was the worst thing that could ever happen. Little did we know. And we thought that he was probably going to start a nuclear war, and we were all going to be just wiped out. And so it was kind of like, so it was, I mean, it's not political at all. And, I mean, this little scene did not last very long, and our scene at the club didn't last long, and really once the AIDS kicked in, it was not so carefree anymore.
Yeah.
And, Gil can talk about that, because you were with him towards the end of his career and life.
That was scary. I think the AIDS epidemic was scarier than any kid coming up with a knife.
Politicians didn't seem to be super keen on solving the problem quickly either, right?
Not on a national level. No, people didn't want to admit it. It's like climate change. It's too vast and scary to deal with until they had to. Until people made them deal with it.
And also, it was, primarily affecting non-desirables, so to speak, the gay community, the black community, the Hispanic community. So these are folks that, didn't necessarily have representation or acknowledgement in government or in the press. So, it was largely ignored until it couldn't be ignored.
Silence equals death. That's when did Keith Haring come with that sentence, with this motto of him?
I wonder if that was an ACT UP
No, that was
slogan.
ACT UP.
It's ACT UP, during the ACT UP.
That was an ACT UP slogan, silence equals death, and they used the pink triangle that was, I guess, used in Nazi Germany to classify, I guess, homosexual people that they deemed, they just labeled them. So they kind of took it as a badge of honor. And Keith was very active in ACT UP. He was very vocal, very very much about standing up and really getting the word out.
And he always attended the protests and
Protests, but
gave away tracts and stuff
yes,
like that. Right?
and also, it was quite risky for him to do that. As he's an emerging artist. He's kind of a star already as an artist, and was taking a huge risk, rabble rousing and protesting about HIV/AIDS, and even coming out as having HIV was a very big deal. That was something that was really not done.
It seems like the whole scene, regardless the sexual preference, could be defined as queer-minded. Am I right about that? I have this feeling that the mindset was very much bending everything, every convention, and that we could say, yeah.
I think that's true, yes. I think that the downtown scene was very mixed, and and we liked it that way. That's why, Clones Go Home was like, meanwhile he went to the garage, which is like, oh man.
Yeah.
But,
Paradise Garage. I saw documentaries about Paradise Garage, and it seems like the best club that ever existed, if you listen to people. Like the place where people maybe had the most fun and most feeling, the strongest feeling of being together and united, like ever, no?
yes, I don't know, because I was not a member, and none of my member friends invited me.
Okay, yeah, but you were DJ there.
Yeah, I was a DJ then. And also I was probably working most Saturday nights that day.
Yeah, actually.
Yeah, the Paradise. I mean,
Was Keith's favorite, right?
What's that?
Was Keith Haring's favorite place more
Paradise Garage is probably the best club that had ever existed. I mean, certainly in New York. I mean, just what it was. It was this DJ, Larry Levan. Larry Levan is considered to be a god among all DJs. Hip hop DJs will always say Larry Levan. House DJs, Larry Levan. He's like the center. And you can describe, the Paradise Garage as church.
You had Junior Vasquez as well?
I'm not sure if Junior played at the Paradise Garage. I know he played at the Sound Factory later. But Larry was it.
Yeah, it seems like it's the consensus. We're gonna listen to another excerpt since we talked about John Sex. It's the song called Bump and Grind It. If the technique wants, maybe not. It started here? No, nothing. Okay, we're not gonna listen to John Sex, Bump and Grind It. It seemed, well, I let it go and maybe it's gonna work. Yes, it worked. You, wonderful. This song is featured in this compilation I told you about, The World of Keith Haring. It was one of the songs we really liked.
I put that record out, and I was the producer of that record.
Oh,
and
wonderful! I didn't
so
know.
I'll tell you the funny story. So you know, John Sex was, you know, he was a great performer. He'd strip and he was cool. He did not have the greatest voice, but he really wanted to sing anyway. April used to perform with
He
him.
had the greatest hair.
And he had the best hair, yes. and he had a crazy sense of humor. So like, you know, it was kind of like stripper thing. So he, you know, he really wanted to put out a record, and he was approached by, you know, okay, he told me the story. So if it's wrong, it's because he told me. So Seymour Stein approached him and said, you know, I'd like to put out a record for you. I want you to do 60s, like Fabian, like boy kind of songs, and we're gonna like redo them in 80s style. And he's like, oh really? You know, they didn't want any of these songs. So he says, so he asked Andy Warhol, what do you think? And Andy Warhol's like, oh, that's such a terrible idea. So he says to Seymour Stein on the phone, well, I just told Andy Warhol and he said that's a terrible idea. And Seymour Stein said, well, okay, let him put out your record, click. And so me and a partner put out the record.
Okay. I want to come back just a little, to go back to Club 57 a little, because it's often by people mistaken with Studio 54, which was absolutely not the same thing, of course, but we tend to mix who was attending and believe it's just one thing. Who was actually attending in the people the audience today might know about? Who were the regulars? You told me
who were the regulars?
Grace Jones?
Never.
Never. And John Waters was also never.
Never.
You would have talked about it your whole life if it happened.
That's right, he never
That's what you
changed.
said. But who did?
Andy Warhol, no.
Yeah.
Madonna, no.
It's all over the internet. Madonna, Club.
Yeah, I know, yeah. No, she was never there.
Yeah, it's all me. But there were still
No,
quite
there were a
interesting
lot
regular.
of great people who went
Yeah,
there.
of course.
For example, Mark Shaman and Scott Whitman produced musicals there, and they end up doing the Hairspray musical. And they, you know, Mark Shaman does music for movies all the time, and they've got like a huge career. They put on The Sound of Music with Holly Woodlawn as Maria. And we did it, and we had it had two sides of the room, so that when one scene would end, we'd yell, rotate, everyone turned their chair around and look at the other side. And it was great. So we had them, I mean, Kenny Sharp was there,
Yeah.
Frank Holliday was there.
Of course, Klaus Nomi.
Klaus Nomi, of course, and Ann Magnuson, and a lot of the downtown bands kind of came there, hung out there.
There seemed to be a lot of
people come to town,
screenings.
they'd come there. Like Public Image started coming there, hanging out when they were in New York.
You did a lot of screenings too, right? A lot of screenings.
We did a lot of movie screenings, yeah. And Kenneth Anger came and showed his films.
Kenneth Anger.
Yeah.
Did you have anything to do with the no-wave cinema, like Nick Zed or Richard Caron?
Some of those were shown there too, yeah. I mean, it's just so many, you know, I can't
Nick
remember
Zed showed
everything,
the
but-
scum, I think.
Nick Zed did the Cinema of Transgression, which was basically a very uncomfortably pornographic amateur film. Yeah, I could say that.
Well, one of my favorite films.
And they're amazing, but they're really rough. And I saw a Nick Zed interview, and he said he paid people with heroin a lot of the time. Really? What he said.
But Nick Zed has a great sense of humor and a sense of bizarre. And his first big film is They Eat Scum, and it is a war between the Death Rockers and the Disco Mutants. And it was weird and kinky and a lot of fun, and people did things in that movie that I would never want to imagine doing myself. And he showed, I think it was an East Village Art benefit, at Club 57 they showed They Eat Scum. But you know what? It was not a place that celebrities went, as far as I know. It was like local East Village kids. When I mean kids, I mean people in their 20s who moved to the East Village to do whatever. And a lot of times it was like the Club 57 people were putting on this show for their own amusement, and the rest of us got to watch. There was, but it was like, it was insular in that sense. It was not something that, it got some press, but it wasn't something that the rest of the world was really paying attention to. And I think that's one of the reasons why so much great stuff was happening, because it wasn't being observed too heavily by the greater public.
Okay, thank you. We're gonna listen another excerpt of, it's a band called Suicide. So the band of Alan Vega and Martin Rev. I think he was your neighbor for a while. You told me about that, no? Alan Vega? No. I recall that from somewhere, sorry. So it's Ghost Rider. It's also very emblematic. Ghost Rider, motorcycle hero. He's a little so cute. Sneaking around in a blue jumpsuit. Ghost Rider, motorcycle hero. He's a blazing away. Stars in the universe. Ghost Rider, motorcycle hero. He's screaming the truth. America's killing its youth. It's very difficult to interrupt a Suicide song. I think it still can trigger. I think that such a song really never dies. It can really trigger a strong sense of danger and pulse and attitude, something very strong. I was mistaken and I thought about Arthur Russell. That's why. Yes. Arthur Russell. About Suicide and such band, I think what's really interesting is that, as you said, it was really breaking boundaries. Here it's pretty much as John Sykes wanted to make sleazy performances and playing with macho attitude without the machism or mocking it as much. I think Alan Vega was a cowboy without all the cowboy crap that comes with the cowboy attitude, and was making rock and roll without the guitar too. So yeah, I think it was quite symbolic to play today. Maybe Gil, could you tell us a bit about Keith's word flow and the way he was always working, and what he used to feed on? What was his triggering such energy to take place in this context that we have spent our time depicting?
So Keith always painted to music. I don't think there was ever a time that I saw him paint that music wasn't present. So at the studio, there was always music. If he was painting outside, it was music. He brought the little boombox with him, and it was always music. The music varied really greatly. He had a bunch of DJ friends that made him mixtapes. So he had Larry Levan tapes, he had David DePino tapes, he had Gil Vasquez tapes. He had all these tapes that his amazing DJ friends would give him. And then he was friends with lots of artists. So people like Madonna, people like Grace Jones, people like Sade. And then, you know, sometimes he would go left and play classical music. And, you know, and get into just a more sort of introspective mood. And you know, the paintings and the work would reflect kind of what he was playing musically.
Kenny Sharp, when they used to be roommate with Kenny Sharp in what they called two room, which was basically a super small room and an even smaller one that you couldn't even call a room, like some kind of closet. That he was listening to B-52s all day long, like 24 hours a day, and painting on it constantly, as fast as possible. And I heard pretty much the same story about Devo, which is like the good silly we talked about. I have just this feeling it's a very playful relation to music, and the way of feeding on is also like some kind of mental gymnastic that would turn on the motor, right?
I mean, in some cases it was playful. You know, other times, you know, some of the music that was coming out in the late 80s, like people like BDP, KRS-One,
Yeah.
Public Enemy, which started to, you know, become more political. Some of that hip hop was really political, and Keith was a huge Public Enemy fan.
Yeah, it's good you mentioned that, because we didn't really touch this side of the context, which is basically the graffiti culture and the hip hop culture.
Yeah, I mean, Keith, you know, for as much as he was not a traditional graffiti artist, he really sort of earned the respect of the graffiti artists. He was not one of them, but he was really respected.
I collaborated for 6 years with LA2 as well.
Yeah, I mean, he was, you know, part of the community.
Maybe we could listen to Fab Five Freddy, Change the Beat, because it was also one of Keith Haring's favorite, and it's hip hop at last. It's said that
Play the French side for here.
Sorry?
Play the French side for here.
It seems that Basquiat was using graffiti as a tool for self-promotion and basically targeted a particular area to enter the art world. And I think Haring's work is pretty much the other way around, like doing it all the time for everybody and everywhere, in all areas of the city. And that's very much in the graffiti culture. He grabbed that really from other street artists who were originating more from this type of culture, spray painters and people like that.
Yeah, I mean, he certainly borrowed from the graffiti sort of ethos. I mean, it was happening in the street, so it was street art in that respect. But a graffiti writer would not call Keith a graffiti artist. You know, he was something really different.
Yeah, I mean, he sought that out from the earliest time. And he wanted to, be in with those people, and they did respect him, and he was not doing the same thing at all. But, but he could mix with those people because what he was doing was cool, and it was not trying to imitate what they were doing.
Right. At the time, there was a sort of an ethos that it was called no biting, right? And what biting meant was copying, and it was very frowned upon. Like if you had a style and if you bit somebody's style, it was just really bad, and not it was not considered cool. So Keith was very much a part of that, and did not copy anyone's style, and got a lot of respect for that.
It's exactly the same today. No, I'm kidding, of course. There was a lot. There is a very last excerpt that I wanted to play to give an idea of the multiplicity, the diversity of the scene back then. It was a French girl who was in the scene back then called Lizzie Mercier de Clou. And I wanted to play the song Fire for a little while, for 40 seconds or something. More party line than the rest. French accent and absolutely didn't care. It is something that we can, let's say, put next to Blondie and other appropriation of disco, reappropriation, reinvention of disco.
She took a 60s song and redid it in a kind of disco style with a punky kind of vocal.
Yeah. I also like that Lizzie Mercier de Clou was actually among the very first Occidental Western artists to go to South Africa and work with Zulu artists during apartheid, way before other artists did it. And I think she was really exploring a lot of realms in music and didn't stop in the music scene, really did a lot. So. It's also, we could just, since it's already going to be the Q&A soon, talk about who those people become and what it triggered as careers and as, let's say, life paths. I think that's quite an important thing too, because we're all down memory lane. I went with you, it was very nice. But who are those people now? The people who made the scene? It's said that it was about 500 people altogether. That's what is usually said. I mean, and I know some people, of course, died, like Glenn Branca not so long ago, and a lot of other people. But do you have ideas? Could you give us ideas of, besides you, people who were back then? I mean. People who did inspiring things after, when everything was over, when the rent became too expensive to afford for artists to stay in this village.
Well, I mean, since we're talking about music, let's talk about ESG's fantastic career, because they went into oblivion and everyone's, sampled their music for years. And now they're back and playing festivals all over the world, and they're doing great. Well, it's just Renee and her son and daughter. And you know, and then they're fantastic, and they've got all of these young fans. So then, like, you know, the B-52s, of course, which is a favorite of Keith's. I mean, they never stopped. Let's see, the Bush Tetras, one of them passed away, but they're back doing new music.
Bush Tetras were
Bush
fantastic.
Tetras, yeah, they're doing new stuff. And then Pylon, which was another favorite of his, and then
Bush Tetras was also only female, right?
no,
No?
the drummer is a man.
Ah, okay, yeah.
And he's still in. The bass player Laura Kennedy passed away. Pylon, which was a favorite
Yes.
group of his, and the singer Vanessa Briscoe Hay has 3 young musicians, and they do Pylon songs and new stuff. They're doing all new stuff too. So I think, you know, some people, and also James Chance. I mean, every so often he comes out and does something. So I mean, a lot of these people who are still alive is doing stuff. Kenny, of course, is still painting, and he's doing very well. Frank Holiday is. You know, I mean, you know, we're all still doing things, and we all live in the past.
Of
So
course.
it's fun to talk about it.
Yeah. Which advice could you give to young DJs? Creative advice about creativity.
I can't really give any advice to a young DJ. I mean, I fell into it because, you know, I really wanted to do it.
What was the appeal for you then? The appeal for you for being a DJ? What was it, you know? Can you say it?
Can I say it?
The appeal for being a DJ.
The appeal, oh yeah, I just love music. I love to make people, you know, I love people to dance, and I love to have fun. I like to dance myself, so, you know, but if for a young DJ, I have no idea what they do now. I don't know anything about it. I have never been able to actually get a job because of the you know, the sexism is out of control, and at least it was then.
Yes.
So anywhere I would go to try and get a job, it would be like, haha, yeah, honey, right. But I did get a lot of jobs, and every single one of them where someone asked me to come to a place and work, so I have no advice for anyone, sorry.
Club 57 was also a place to shelter against this homophobia and sexism all over. You depicted it the other day as almost some kind of matriarchal society. No? You were running it among women.
Yeah, there was a women's club called the Ladies Auxiliary of Lower East Side, and that was basically meeting in Ann Magnuson's apartment and planning events for the club. And that's not to say that other people couldn't plan events for the club, because they did. But yeah, that was one of the things we did.
Okay. Any advice for young journalists or writers or people? I mean, it's a question that might be relevant. Sometimes it is.
I don't know. I mean,
My bad.
I mean, when we did the East Village Eye, we created it out of nothing. I mean, really nothing. I created a dummy magazine. I took some cardboard and I pasted up some articles from other papers and made it look like the magazine that I was going to do, and I sold ads to stores before the magazine existed, and that's how the first one came out. Today, I'll tell you, I don't feel the same way about online stuff. I just don't. I like print. I like how it smells. I like how it feels. I like the fact that it doesn't disappear in 5 seconds. It stays around for, forever.
Just mentioned that the copies of the East Village Eye are possible to see within the Keith Haring show.
There are a few
They look
copies.
amazing. They're really fantastic.
You can go to eastvillageye.com and you can see maybe 10 issues on PDFs, and every few months or so we replace them with 10 other issues, and you can download them and you can read them. But I'd say, I just say that I respect people who just do it, and it's not really that hard to do. I mean, in a sense, you get your hands on a few $100s, a few €100, make something and print it, and you'd be amazed the impact that can have.
Thank you. You have an experience as a DJ. Can you tell us just shortly about it?
So really quickly, I was the stuff that I'm known for as a DJ was the mixtapes in the 90s. So, this is like after Keith, and we were known for like these, what they call mashups now. So that we did these like crazy blends. So, we were doing things with really limited equipment, tape decks, just really cheap equipment. And what's so amazing about now is that you can do so much more with the technology.
You were providing Keith Haring constant, like a big long string of tapes, of mixtapes to paint on, right?
Yeah, I mean, I gave him tons of tapes, and that's how people consume music on cassette. But now, my goodness, everything is so accessible and possible.
I was about to say the same thing about Leonard, what Leonard was saying, because it seems that what was lacking before is information. When those things started, means, information, possibilities. You had to create possibilities. Club 57 started in the basement of a Polish church. It's very much doing something that doesn't exist from scratch. And now I believe we just have too much of everything. So that could be an interesting perspective, like to consider that maybe we have to do the opposite. Maybe we have to do it the same way, create rarity. It's another idea about it.
Well, people don't have to be in the same place to do things together, I suppose. But I think that, it's good for, maybe misfit people who live outside of a city and they can get together online and, but then, maybe that's not good because then they don't leave. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a very difficult question.
Well, it's unquestionable that you can do something today and so many people can see it, and that's a great thing. But getting back to the plastic arts, physical art, and print, you create object value. You have a thing that doesn't disappear. And you talk about eyeballs online. If you have a physical thing, you might look at it 100 times. And you will look at it 100 times. It's in your house. And that has a lot of impact. And it is a thing that exists that doesn't evaporate in a second. I think that's valuable. And I think we should keep doing it.
Thank you very much. I think we're good. I wanted to start the Q&A, so